Welcome back to our study, Answers to Tough Questions. And this is our final session, session 6. What evidence does my testimony offer? What proof does my personal testimony of life change through Jesus Christ offer? And we're studying this week Acts chapter 26. And this is such an excellent chapter with a huge exegetical payoff as we dig deep into the study together this week. Because contextually, if we just look at something of what's happening in the context, when you think about the book of Acts, here is the Apostle Paul, a Roman citizen who had appealed to Caesar himself. And as you open up the pages of Acts chapter 26, Paul is waiting for his opportunity to appeal to Caesar. And it just so happens, in the plan of God, Festus is keeping Paul prisoner. King Agrippa comes to town with his incestuous relationship with his wife, and it just so happens they throw a party, and they thought it would be interesting to hear from this person who is famous by now, known as the Apostle Paul. I mean, do you remember the incredible miracles that Paul is performing a few chapters earlier in Acts chapter 9? You know, the gospel is unstoppable. It changes lives. I mean, no doubt they had heard of what had happened at Ephesus. Paul preached, and everyone brought their magic books together and burned them to the tune of about $7 million in our currency today. And then a riot broke out. So, oh yeah, I've got to hear from this guy. Here's the key point when it comes to Paul's testimony contextually. He didn't even have to leave his cell. Did you know that? He was not required at all to leave his cell and give his personal story or his personal testimony. And yet we hear 3 different times. In the English, it's defense, but in the Greek, it's that powerful word that I want to encourage you to learn, apologia. Let's try to say it again. You can actually say it right in your Bible study. Apologia, that's right. One more time. Apologia, a defense, a reason. This was a powerful word. In fact, it's not even a biblical word. Socrates was using this word 500 years before the New Testament was ever written. Paul said in verse 1, he said he stretches out his hands, and Luke writes, and he begins his defense. He begins to give his apologia, the reason of what Jesus had done for him. I consider fortunate. He's excited. I can sense Paul's energy. He knows this is a God appointment, that he can proclaim the truth of Jesus Christ before the most powerful leaders of the region in his day. He said, I consider it fortunate that I can come before you today. Pause right there for an important note of application. Do you pause your schedule and look for those divine moments where you can speak for God? You know, it's very important that we look for those divine moments when I can speak up and do something so powerful, tell someone what Jesus Christ did to change my life. I believe that the power of personal transformation, the power of that story, is far more powerful than all of the apologetic evidences combined. Because when your life is changed, you affect other people's, you affect your community, you affect your family, and no one can argue with a changed life. We just simply can't. And as we go on and we move through this story, there's a few important footnotes that I just need to point out as someone who has loved serving for years in the local church, as someone that speaks and ministers across the world. Paul only takes about 20% of Acts chapter 26, only about 20%, not even, maybe 19%, to talk about his life before Jesus. It really wasn't important. He was lost. He knew that he needed God, and he talks about the moment of meeting Jesus. That takes prominence. And then he talks about how his life was utterly transformed, and he gets to the end at verse 23, and he starts talking about the physical bodily resurrection of Jesus, and that's where Festus can hear it no more. He said, Paul, you're out of your mind. But I think there's some important notes here when we give our personal testimony. Let's not focus too much about our life before Jesus Christ. I mean, that's really between you and the Lord. And let's talk about that moment, though, when we meet Jesus Christ. And then let's spend the bulk of our testimony. Paul gives us a great template, doesn't he? Talking about not only how he's transformed my life, but how he's using my life for his kingdom. You know, Audrey and I saw this firsthand during the worst natural disaster in American history, during Hurricane Harvey. We were evacuated from our home. In fact, they were coming on from the Office of Emergency Management saying that the river near our home was going to be at an all-time high. 50% of our county was going to be inundated, and they were actually telling families to go up on their roof to be rescued. Now, if you know anything about our family story, we have 5 children, and at the time we had triplet boys, 13 months old, and my immediate question was, how do I get triplets on my roof? Audrey, we got to get out of here. And it's actually difficult to be evacuated. It's difficult. It became almost, it was like we were living in the end of times, to be honest with you. I mean, it was every man for himself for a while. But what was remarkable about living through that evacuation was coming back to Fort Bend County, the county where I live, the most diverse county in America. So just think about that culturally. We live in the most diverse county in America, in Houston. Do you know what happened next? Christians literally from all over America and beyond invaded our city. Christians outpaced the U.S. government. I've written about this, it's documented, and Christians became this like SWAT teams for God, pounding on people's doors, saying, hey, we're from the church down the street, you know, First Baptist Fulshear, or we're from this community, or we're this youth ministry at a university in Maryland, and we just felt led to come here. We're going to muck out your homes. We're going to clean out your homes. You know, there's a procedure that has to happen if any of you know when your home is flooded. Would you mind, before we start, can we just pray for your family? It was powerful, friends. 179,000 homes destroyed. And Christians, this amazing, powerful global syndicate that you're part of called the Church of Jesus Christ, was performing great miracles in people's lives. And do you know, while you're mucking out a home, when you're serving someone, serving your community, there were these beautiful God divine moments where, hey, while we take a break here, can I just tell you what Jesus has done in my life? No one could argue with it. You know, I was working with some atheists and agnostics about a month before Hurricane Harvey, and I listened to them tell me how the church doesn't matter, the church is irrelevant, the church has no importance in life today. And only a month later, I was watching secular news anchors saying, thank God for Christians here in Houston. Thank God for that Christian that helped my family out. That's the power of personal testimony when we go beyond our words, which it's so important we articulate it, and that's what I'm teaching you to do this week in the study. But we actually get some bootstraps, and we go serve someone. No one can argue with that, the impact and the power of the church. And that's what Paul was showing to Festus and Felix. That's what the early Christian apologists were talking about. I mean, when you study, friends, the early Christian movement, do you realize they were men and women who outthought everyone around them? They literally, let me say it again, they outthought everyone around them. They took Jesus' command in Matthew 26, Matthew 22:37, and Mark chapter 12. They took that command to love God with your heart, soul, and mind. Remember, Jesus does what only he can do. He quotes the Shema to the Pharisees who say, what's the greatest commandment? He quotes Deuteronomy 6:3, but only as the Messiah can do. He changes it. He says, love God with your heart, soul, strength, and mind. They took that seriously. And we have Justin Martyr in the 2nd century writing these beautiful letters to Roman emperors about how Christians are really great people for the empire. They're great citizens. They pay their taxes. They take care of the poor, the needy. I mean, let me give you just a great real-time example. Do you know in the United States there are 46,000 agencies that simply exist to feed the homeless? Do you know more than 60% of those 46,000 food banks are Christian? So in other words, if there were no Christians tomorrow, if we all vanished, America's homeless would starve. Isn't it amazing to see that we can communicate our testimony, we can love, and we can serve others? And that's what I want to leave you with in this final session. It really doesn't matter how much we know about our faith if we're not willing to speak up in those God moments. And guess what? Sometimes those God moments are not on our calendar, so we're just going to have to give our calendar to the Lord and say, God, we give you our calendar. I see this right now as a God moment. I'm going to leave the rest of my day to you, and I'm going to speak, Lord. And I'm going to do it with the enthusiasm that Paul had, where 3 times I'm so eager to give my defense. He jumped up every day waiting for those God moments. I pray that as you leave this study more resourced, more equipped to answer these engaging questions, you will be so energized and really motivated to speak for Jesus Christ in a winsome way when given the opportunity.